Welcome, fellow creatures of the night, to another meeting of the Midnight Culture Club. Here we venture deep into the nocturnal lands of the strange, the morbid, the absurd, and the obscure in film, books, TV, fairy tales, urban legends, and many other forms of pop culture. We discuss and analyse these texts to explore the fascinating ways in which they reflect, comment on, and critique the world we live in from its darker side. I am Xenia, the overmotivated nerd who won't let any other members get a word in tonight, and I declare this meeting of the Midnight Culture Club officially in session. Tonight, my bats and cats and kittens, we are doing something exciting. We are changing our name to the Midnight Automobile Club because I have a lightning fast, furious treat for you. No, we're not talking about the Fast and the Furious, but we're talking about a fantastic car who is both fast and furious. Like last episode, we're a little more light-hearted today, but fear not, there will still be a bit of psychoanalytic theory and, of course, murder. Spectacular supernatural murder nonetheless. And we're going to make fun of Stephen King's dumb characters, but most importantly, we will marvel at, admire even, an iconic horror villain who is by far too great for her story and her creator. I've been thinking about recording this episode for a while, which means I've had some notes for it for months, but nothing substantial. I didn't really know where to go with it, what I wanted to analyze, so it was kind of up in the air whether I was going to actually do this or not. But then a sign came to me from the heavens, also known as the YouTube channel of my beloved Elise. She is a creator who does pop culture commentary and she makes fun of bad books on YouTube. She is my queen and savior. I love her very much. She's very funny, very sarcastic, absolute icon. So I was watching a video of hers, and there she said she finds it a bit silly when authors include playlists in the back of a book, and she was specifically talking about romance books here. That's important. Now on this video there was a comment by a person called Muttonfest, which is already a good sign because Muttonfest translates to moth party, so clearly this is someone who knows what they're talking about. They wrote a comment in reference to this, and the comment says, Stephen King has included playlists within his novels. One even happens to be my favourite romance novel, Christine. The infinite wisdom of Muttonfest's comment struck me like lightning upon reading this, and I knew it was time to talk about Christine, and it even gave me an idea what to focus on, because Christine, the novel we are going to be talking about, as you maybe noticed, it is a story that can be read as romantic if you want to, and it is titled after its evil icon, its leading lady, Christine. The book and its film adaptation both tell the love story between a nerdy teenager and a very, very charismatic, jealous, and bloodthirsty car. And then there are some idiot humans messing everything up for them, you'll see. I read Christine last summer in a terrible translation. I don't usually read English language books translated, I just read them in English, but I was sort of last minute looking for something to bring on holiday with me, and my mum had the translated version at home, so I just took that with me, and the translation was so bad. It was terrible. They translated like heavy metal music as Schwermetall, which literally means like heavy metal, as in, you know, metals that are heavy. The genre of music is also called heavy metal in German, you know, stuff like that. So in this, the book was fantastic and disappointing at the same time. The terrible translation, which was terrible but also funny, but it is also fantastic and disappointing simply in its plot. This is my first ever Stephen King book, and I didn't really know what to expect. I'd only, I think, watched Carrie and that was it. So I didn't really know what the style was going to be. And yeah, I very much felt like, oh, this is a brilliant idea, but the execution is kind of not that great. But, you know, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. There is also a film version of Christine, as I just said earlier, that was directed by the legendary John Carpenter of Halloween fame, and I actually think that that is a lot less disappointing than the book. Tonight we will be talking about both versions, but first, let's set the scene. It is a wonderful balmy night at the end of August, when the late summer breeze gently ruffles your hair. The evenings are fresher again, and there is a smell of distant rain in the air. Soon you will start senior year of high school, and you're feeling a little bit nostalgic about the summer that is just ending. The last summer as you've always known them. Next year, this time, you will be getting ready for college. You will be an adult. These are the last real hours of your teenage years and the first breaths of freedom, because you are driving her, your first own car, your beautiful, beautiful car who will take you anywhere you like. She breezes down the highway with you at a speed that makes your heart beat faster. She's your companion, your best friend. She makes you feel like a grown man. And as you ride down the road with the windows open wide, 1950s rock and roll plays on the green glowing radio. Your mind is set on no one but her. Your true love, Christine. Allow me to introduce her. Christine is a legend, an icon, a queen. She is blood red and brilliant and lightning fast. She is a time-bending, self-repairing, red and white 1958 Plymouth Fury. And even though she was born in a factory like every other car, she is the only one of her kind. Partly because her blood red finish is custom, but mostly because she is more than just an object. Christine has a life of her own. If you cross her, you will come to regret it. For Fury is not just the name of her model, it is the essence of her soul. You heard Christine? Christine will hunt you down. Wherever you try to hide, she will find you, and she will end you. And no one will ever know because she uses her self-repair magic to cover up her unhinged killing spree fueled by rage, revenge, and jealous bloodlust. Christine is the ultimate femme fatale. Christine is the only killer anyone should be making thirst edits about. Unfortunately, there are also many humans that are trying to hamper her success and drag her down to their level. One of these humans is Stephen King himself, in that he does not do Christine justice in his novel. And since I'm clearly much more competent than the acclaimed best-selling author Mr. Stephen King himself, over the course of this episode I'm going to extensively complain about his creative decisions. These criticisms are, by the way, backed up by the fact that John Carpenter changed quite a few of the things I like to complain about in his film adaptation, which is clearly because he travelled into the future, listened to this episode and went, yeah, that bitch on the internet is right, I'll do what she says. Apart from take out the horrible misogynistic comments everyone makes all the time. They have to stay for some reason. But alas, enough warming up our motor. Let's hit the gas. The main narrator of this tale is tragically not Christine. Because you know what would have been amazing? If Christine was a first-person narrator and we only realized halfway through the book that she is a car. But no. The primary narrator is a guy called Dennis. This is an instant red flag. People called Dennis are, as a general rule, extremely dodgy, if not outright horrible. They're always either bullies or serial killers or married to and enabling Margaret Thatcher, shit like that. If you are a non-dodgy person called Dennis, first of all, are you really non-dodgy? Don't just ask yourself, ask your friends and family too, because you might not realize that you're dodgy, or considering that you're a Dennis, you might be lying to yourself about not being dodgy. If after this survey you're still found non-dodgy, then I'm very sorry that your parents made such a misguided choice in naming you, and I hope that you're okay. Anyway, this Dennis is not only unbearable due to being a Dennis, he is also a 17-year-old star high school football player and professional misogynistic ultra creep. His favourite hobbies are fat-shaming anyone he meets and commenting on every pair of boobs that crosses his path, including his 14-year-old sisters. An absolute catch. What a great man. Or boy, he's 17. A boy. For some reason, he seems to think that he is the hero of the story. Stephen King seems to think that as well. Like, he seems to believe that we care about this idiot when we read this book. I don't know where he got that from. The hero is not Dennis, it's Christine, and Christine is who we are rooting for, because she's cool. Despicable Dennis is mercifully graced by making Christine's acquaintance because of his friend Arnie Cunningham. Arnie, short for Arnold, is a classic nerd with greasy hair, big glasses, and according to the book, but not the film, a lot of acne. Of course, he doesn't have acne in the film. They'd have to cast an actor with acne, and being an actor with acne or any other physical imperfection is illegal in the US. God beware anyone on screen look like a normal human. How would you give everyone body image issues that uphold the entire beauty industry, right? Not possible. Because Arnie is a nerd, of course, he gets bullied by everyone, except for Dennis. This is what Dennis tells us. He might as well be lying. We cannot trust him. But what we do know is that Arnie seems to be pretty miserable. He can't get any girlfriend. And he is also oppressed by his bad, dominant mother, who won't let him make any decisions for himself. One day, Dennis, and this is the only useful thing he does throughout the whole book, Dennis saves Arnie from a group of bullies who humiliate him and threaten him with a knife. That's important, this group of bullies, because they will come back. After this event, however, Arnie's luck changes. One afternoon, as Arnie and Dennis drive home from school, Arnie spots a run-down red 1958 Plymouth Fury by the side of the road, and it is love at first sight. This car, of course, is Christine. Even though Christine is massively overpriced and literally falling apart, Arnie buys her from her misanthropic owner, a guy called Roland LeBay, who is like this kind of weird old creepy dude, and he likes to refer to anyone he doesn't like, which is everybody, as shitters. At this point, I want to point out to you that Roland, LeBay's first name, and Arnold, which is Arnie's first name, are anagrams of one another, so you know, it seems like we have a bit of a repetition in Christine's ownership going on here. So Arnie buys Christine, but he's not allowed to keep her at home because his mum doesn't like her. Because of this, he takes Christine to a garage, to like a DIY garage, where you can like put in your car and repair it. The owner is a sort of gangstery guy, and there's a whole subplot about him, but I'll leave that out today because it's not really relevant for what we want to talk about. What is important is that Arnie begins repairing Christine, or so it seems. Dennis, who still narrates at this point, notices that the repairs Arnie does are kind of weird. You know, he replaces a random door, or he fixes one light but not the other, stuff like that. It just seems a little bit random. And sometimes there are repairs that are almost impossible. For example, Arnie seems to get like really expensive replacement pieces for the car, like the windshield, out of nowhere. A second thing that Dennis notices is that Christine's odometer, you know, the thing that counts how many miles the car has driven, seems to be going backwards and not forwards. There are fewer and fewer miles recorded on it. That is, of course, also kind of unusual. And then there is a third strange occurrence. When he sits in the car with Arnie, Dennis experiences a kind of flashback, not into his own past, but into the 1950s. The streets outside suddenly look different. People are dressed in period clothing. The radio will only play 50s rock and roll. And instead of being excited about being inside a literal time machine, like a normal person, Dennis decides that this is super strange and that he now doesn't like Christine because she has cool superpowers. I told you he's a stupid idiot. At the same time, as Dennis notices all of this stuff going on, Arnie becomes increasingly irritable and aggressive and distant from his friend. He's got a really short fuse, he shouts at people really quickly, he insults them, and he starts calling people shitters. Ain't that curious? At the same time as this happens, Arnie also magically becomes kind of hot. His acne disappears, his hair becomes great. It doesn't just become great, it turns into a sort of 50s greaser style quiff. He starts wearing leather jackets and nice jeans and boots and stuff like that. Basically, he turns into a hermit Danny Zuko. Or one might say he returns into a second, younger Roland LeBay. The original LeBay, shortly after selling Christine, dies. Oopsie. After this, Dennis goes to talk to LeBay's brother and learns that LeBay was a horrible, violent man, and that he was really mean to his wife and his daughter, and also that this daughter choked to death inside Christine while eating a hamburger. And the wife took her own life inside the car. And despite all of this tragedy, LeBay kept Christine. Dennis thinks this is all pretty weird and he wants to warn Arnie about it because, you know, they're American. If somebody has died inside anything, you have to get rid of it. You cannot possibly have a car where somebody died in because it has to be haunted, or live in a house where somebody died in because it has to be haunted. I will say, if two people died in a car, it is kind of suspicious. Personally, my thought would not be that there's something wrong with the car, but rather that maybe the owner is kind of shady, but I don't know. Anyway, around this time, Arnie, after becoming hot and having a cool car, he pulls a girl called Lee. Lee is new at the school and she is the sexy virgin who rejected all the other boys. They were all hitting on her and she was like, no. But then Arnie showed up and she was like, you know, this one I'll date. And that is, of course, the greatest mystery of all. A nerd acquiring a hot girlfriend, the greatest possession a teenage boy in a teenage boy can have, right? Aside from this, Arnie already has a hot girlfriend. It's Christine, but okay. It is also around this part of the book where Dennis is injured during a football game and he has to go to hospital for a long time. But much worse than this, Christine is trashed by the group of bullies who attacked Arnie at the beginning of the book. This middle part, by the way, where we're at now, is told in the third person, following Arnie and Christine. After he finds the absolutely wrecked Christine, Arnie starts to push her around the garage, which causes her odometer to continue going backwards, and behold, as this happens, the damage that was done to her begins to repair itself. And soon Christine is restored to all her glory. And then the murders begin. Well, the first is but an attempt. Lee, Arnie's girlfriend, she says within earshot of Christine that she doesn't like her, and that she's jealous of the time Arnie spends with Christine, and she says that Christine, like all cars, is clearly a girl, and she is not just an ordinary car, but one that somehow seems to really draw Arnie in, taking all of his attention. Lee says that Arnie seems to be in love with Christine. Arnie, of course, denies all of this, but he is very upset that Lee criticizes Christine so much. And Christine definitely doesn't like Lee saying that. A little bit later, when Arnie and Lee are sitting in the car in a drive-in cinema, Lee eats a hamburger and chokes on a bite of it, which is very American of her, and also kind of similar to something that has happened in this car before. Remember LeBay's daughter who choked on a bit of hamburger? Luckily, unlike the daughter, Lee survives because a random hitchhiker pulls open the car, drags her out, and saves her using the Heimlich maneuver. Interestingly, Arnie doesn't realize what is going on in that he doesn't remember the existence of the Heimlich maneuver and seems to think that the guy is trying to hurt Lee. Later we find out that this is probably because Arnie is so influenced by Christine's kind of 1950s time warp thing that he simply forgot about the existence of the Heimlich maneuver, which wasn't invented yet at the time. After this failed attempt, Christine picks up the pace. True to her name, like a fury, she hunts down the bullies who destroyed her, right? The ones who trashed her and left her in pieces. She hunts them down one after the other. She chases them down lonely midnight streets. She smashes them into walls. She crushes them to pulp under her wheels. She even demolishes a building to kill one of her selected victims hiding inside of it. If Christine has your name on her kill list, there is no escape, even if she completely dilapidates herself in the process. But that is not a problem for Christine, because she can just repair herself again. The police notices these killings. They realize that there seems to have been a series of murders committed with a car as like the weapon. And they do manage to link them to Christine. They start suspecting Arnie, but because of Christine's self-repair magic, there is absolutely no physical evidence that she was involved in any of these killings. Nothing can be proved. She should be destroyed, but she's not. So one might say she is committing perfect crimes because she is so smart. Lee and Dennis, hellbent on ruining Christine's vibe, still suspect her though, and they also suspect that Christine will probably try to kill them soon. After all, they keep getting in her way, they keep criticizing her and telling Arnie to get rid of her. Of course she's mad. So they come up with an absolutely genius plan. Dennis finds a very, very big sewage truck that they want to use to crush Christine. The truck, by the way, is called Petunia. She is not sentient like Christine. She just has the name Petunia painted on her. I have no idea why, but it's funny, so I'm telling you. So Petunia is ready. She's there. They put her in the garage where Christine usually stays overnight. So they put her in there and they hide in the garage and wait for Christine to come to them. The problem is that Petunia is not an automatic. She is a manual car. And as you may remember, Dennis injured himself and had to go to the hospital. Part of his injury is that he broke his leg. So basically he can't really drive a manual car, right? Where you need both your legs to work to operate the pedals. So he comes up with the most logical solution. He asks Lee, who has 2 healthy legs and can drive, to drive Petunia. Yeah, you didn't think Dennis would do something normal like that, did you? No, of course not. He gets a stick and uses the stick to operate the gas and the brakes. Because he only needs one hand to do all that steering to fight a sentient car, and it's like super easy to operate a pedal with your hand on a stick. Not a brain cell in sight. See, that's what it does to you when you play too much football. It just kills your brain cells. Anyway, after coming up with this genius plan, Dennis and Lee lure Christine into the garage. They provoke her in some way. I don't really remember how they do it. In the film, they like scratch the name of the garage and the day where they want to meet into her beautiful red polish, which is very rude, and it works. Of course, she gets mad at that. So yeah, they lure her to the garage where Dennis and Lee and Petunia are already waiting for the ultimate showdown. Basically, the girls fight, right? Petunia and Christine, they have a big old fight. Petunia, of course, expertly handled by Dennis and his stupid fucking stick. And Christine? Well, Dennis notices that someone is behind Christine's steering wheel when Christine charges at Lee, who they just put outside as like bait for Christine, instead of making her drive the fucking car. Anyway, Dennis notices that someone is actually behind Christine's steering wheel, and first he thinks, oh, it's probably Arnie, but it's not. It is none other than Roland LeBay's ghost. During this fight, Dennis breaks his leg again, and then he realizes that his stick idea was completely fucking stupid. And at this point, he actually lets Lee into Petunia, into the truck, and allows her to operate one of the pedals of the truck, which I think is still more difficult than if he just let her drive it, but whatever. Like this, they manage to subjugate Christine. Literally, they drive right over her until she is just flattened scrap metal. It is a horrible, brutal murder, and for some reason they think that's cool. Disgusting. This glorious victory doesn't remain all that glorious though, because Dennis and Lee learn that while they were fighting Christine, Arnie and his mother died in a car crash outside of town. Dennis is convinced that LeBay's ghost, after leaving Christine, attacked Arnie while he was driving, and that caused the car crash. After this, of course, how else could it be, Lee and Dennis become a couple because, of course, now that he's defeated the bad monster, Dennis has to be rewarded with a fair maiden who, and it's important we know this, we are told this several times, is still a virgin because she didn't want to have sex with Arnie inside of Christine. That is a fucked up sentence. Anyway, they end up together and she's still a perfect prize because she hasn't had sex yet. So, you know, she's a new car. She's not a used car. Fantastic. But we are not done yet because now we get a good bit. Okay. Years later, Lee has separated from Dennis and moved on. Good choice. Leave that idiot behind. And Dennis is kind of miserable at this point of his life. His injury has never properly healed. Again, Lee has left him. He's just kind of grumpy. So he's reading the newspaper and he reads of a man who he thinks, based on his name, is the last surviving bully who was involved in the demolition of Christine back in the day. He reads that this man was killed by a car, no driver in sight, that crashed into a drive-in theater and instantly killed the guy. A cold shower runs down Dennis's spine. He knows that Christine is back and she is coming to get him. In the film, this bit is done a little more elegantly, so I just want to quickly tell you how they do it because it's really cool. Here, Lee and Dennis watch Christine get pressed into one of those, like, scrap metal blocks at the junkyard. The block is kind of lowered to the ground in front of them, and at the front of it, you see her radiator grill that is sort of squashed together and all wavy. And while they are looking at it, suddenly the radiator grill straightens just a little bit. And the music from the opening scene, where we see Christine be constructed in the factory, rolls again. It's a very beautifully done scene and it links back so well to the beginning. You get the circularity. She's coming back, she's indestructible. So now that you know what is going on with Christine and the unworthy human peasants that stand in the way of her glory, I want to focus on one thing that the YouTube commenter, Mottenfest, whose comment I read to you at the beginning, something that they point towards by calling Christine their favourite romance novel. I want to talk about what's the deal with the romance in this story. Specifically, I kind of want to discuss how and why and in which cultural context the relationship between Arnie and Christine is very much portrayed in romantic terms throughout the book and the film, and what the impact of that is. So throughout the story, the relationship between Arnie and Christine is repeatedly portrayed in romantic terms. Dennis opens the narration of the novel by describing the story as a love triangle between Arnie, Lee, and Christine. Throughout the text, we repeatedly see how Arnie lovingly touches Christine. He speaks to her like a lover. He tells other people to be careful what they say because she's sensitive, stuff like that. And she really is his first priority. So he does interact with her like you kind of would with a romantic partner. I found an interesting article about this topic of Christine and Arnie as a romantic couple and the rendering of the car as female in American pop culture. This is an article by Edward Madden, and he writes about how there is a stereotypical perception of the car as a feminized object, almost a sort of a female partner to the equally stereotypically male owner. He mentions the 1950s as a period where this is particularly important, so the period when Christine was made. This also has to do with the fact that the 1950s are kind of the period where teenage culture really became a thing. And at the same time, it was a period where teenagers in the US could often afford a car. So the car was a very important sort of companion to teenagers, especially male teenagers. I mean, if you watch something like Grease, for example, I think you know what I mean, right? They're always driving around in their cars, and the car is very important for them, and they do all those races, and they do the whole song and dance about that car that they want to fix up, you know. It was a big part of especially male teenage American culture. Now, in this framework, Madden continues, both cars and women are seen as status symbols, and that is one of the reasons why they sort of become conflated. Cars are status symbols and commodities that signify power and wealth and freedom for the owner. And something very similar happens in a patriarchal worldview with female partners. They are also status symbols that, you know, signify your social role, basically. You know, if you are a cool guy with a lot of status, you get the hot girlfriend. In this case, that would be Lee, right? She's this girl that all the boys want to date, but she doesn't want to date them. So she's like an exclusive commodity, basically. And the best guys are rewarded with winning her. And that is very similar to how, you know, the cool guys have the best cars. And if you have a good car, you kind of become cool. Madden points out that in Christine, both the female car Christine, because she's consistently referred to as she and her and as Christine. No one ever called her the car or something like that. So the female car Christine and the female love interest Lee are both used as these kinds of signifiers of male power and a male accomplishment. And they are both sort of traded between different male characters as commodities. Arnie buys Christine from LeBay, or in the film from LeBay's brother, and through this he gains status, attractiveness, and popularity. Madden writes, Arnie Cunningham, the stereotypical nerd, must buy a car and obtain a girlfriend in order to construct himself as an autonomous male. So these two actions of getting a car and getting a girlfriend are causally linked in this case, because Lee dates Arnie as a result of him becoming more attractive and autonomous through Christine. So through buying Christine, he becomes a kind of viable male partner. So we have this first transfer, right, of status onto Arnie by buying Christine from another man. And then once he has Christine, he has the high enough status to get a girlfriend. And in a second step, Lee is then transferred from Arnie, who kind of neglects her for Christine and who also becomes quite horrible to her. He's really very aggressive and rude, and he calls her a bitch and stuff like that later on in the book. Lee is then transferred to the more heroic masculine man Dennis, who from the beginning kind of fits this ideal of masculinity. He's athletic and strong and he protects the weak, blah blah blah. So at the end he is rewarded for destroying Christine and for always being a good guy, apart from being horribly misogynistic. He is rewarded for that by receiving Lee as a trophy, basically. So she is the second commodity that is passed on between people. So we see how both the car and the girl are parallel objects of commodity that function as markers of male accomplishment. And you don't need me to tell you that this is very, very misogynistic and questionable. But what I think is interesting is that it juxtaposes these two figures, and that's very important. And we'll get back to that in a second, because first I need to complain a little bit more. Funnily enough, I had a conversation this summer about this exact topic, about conflating women and cars with some young lads. So basically one of them refer to women, like different women, as like VWs and Ferraris, you know, depending on how attractive they are, I guess. And I tried to explain to him why that is fucked up, but unfortunately with very little success. But what I can say for sure is that the metaphor of a female romantic partner as a car, or vice versa, that then automatically marks a car as her male partner's property and status symbol, is alive and well. So yeah, we still live in the 50s, I guess. Now, what's interesting about the parallel treatment of Lee and Christine is that the female characters in the story are very aware of this car woman construct, and they both want to win. And with female characters, I mean Lee and Christine. So Lee says when she complains to Arnie that he spends more time with Christine than her, that cars are girls, and him being with Christine all the time is basically as if he's cheating on her. And Christine tries to kill her in response. So the female figures really compete with each other for male attention, right? Although I think you could also say that Christine just tries to kill someone who was mean to her. But Lee is very much embedded in this conflation of women and cars, and this stereotypical reading of cars as female and women as sort of equivalent possessions of men, like cars. You know what I mean? And I think it's very interesting that this is a very central element of the plot. We have this rivalry basically between Lee and Christine in a sense. And this is reflected in quite a few of the film posters where Christine is juxtaposed with Lee. So in quite a few of the posters, you get Christine in the foreground, sort of facing the camera with her front. So you have her lights kind of looking at you like eyes. And above that, we see Lee's eyes wide open in shock, either in a sort of blaze of flame above the car or in the rear view mirror. So they are really kind of juxtaposed with each other. We have both of them frontally with their eyes in focus looking at us, and we see Lee being terrified of Christine, who she is juxtaposed with. Really interesting design. There's also one specific movie poster. So in this poster, we get quite a bit of text. They say, oh, she was born bad, somewhere deep on a darkened assembly line, Christine, blah, blah, blah. And it ends with, and now she's steering straight for the one person in her way, Arnie's girlfriend, Lee, the other woman. So here the idea of this love triangle of Arnie and these two women is really highlighted. And I think it's interesting because obviously from Christine's perspective, Lee is the other woman, but from Lee's perspective, Christine is the other woman. Yeah, I find it fascinating how that dynamic is really foregrounded in the posters, and it does kind of sit at the core of the story. These two characters are, you know, competing love interests, where from the point of view of the narrative, Lee is like the good, official, proper human girlfriend, while Christine is portrayed as a sort of vicious, jealous, possessive woman. And again, it kind of depends what perspective we look at it from. But of course, Christine would sort of fit into this idea of the crazy other woman, you know, sort of like a bit like Glenn Close's character in Fatal Attraction, who has an affair with the main character and then wants him to be with her and leave his family, and then she goes completely nuts. And we can say for sure that in this romantic framework, Christine is certainly not a very healthy partner, right? Because Arnie becomes increasingly dependent on her. He becomes rude and aggressive towards his family, his friends, and towards Lee. You could say that Christine kind of isolates Arnie from his environment so that she can control him better. She lures him in, he only pays attention to her, she's his top priority, and nothing else really matters. Something that is very noticeable in the book as well, that's not really as much in the film, but in the book, his behavior changes depending on how close he is to Christine. So if Arnie is sitting inside Christine or he's standing close to her, he's a lot more aggressive and mean and focused on her. And as soon as he goes a bit further away, he kind of becomes his more balanced, older self again. It's really interesting how that works. It's very, very cool. It's very well done. And there are also moments where he feels insecure and then he touches Christine and then suddenly he gains, confidence again. It's really cool how that's done. I really enjoyed that. And it's kind of subtle. It's quite cool. But even though we have this whole women and cars as male possessions and commodities to mark men's status thing going on, there is something that undermines that a little bit, something that subverts this power dynamic, and that is Christine's ability to drive herself regardless of her male owner, to act on her own behalf. Because through this, even though she is officially owned by LeBay and then Arnie, she has agency to some degree. This leads us very nicely to the second point that I want to discuss regarding Christine. And this one traces the main difference between the book and the film. No, I don't mean the presence or absence of Arnie's acne, or that the truck Dennis uses to cruelly murder Christine being called Petunia in the book and not having a name in the film. Very sad. The main difference lies in Christine's very nature. I want to ask and try to answer the questions: what is Christine? Why does she do what she does? What is her motive? What is her drive? And why on earth do we, or at least I, root for her so much? Well, it depends. So, in the book, Christine's motivations and way of functioning are a little bit unclear. For much of the book, it is implied that Christine is her own sentient being and that she acts on her own behalf, exacts her own revenge, does her own thing. But the moment that LeBay's ghost appears and starts participating in the action and literally driving Christine, it becomes a little murky as to which actions are his and which are Christine's. Now, personally, I would say that the time-bending and self-repairing abilities, I would classify those as something Christine just inherently has, because she's this sort of supernatural car, right? I don't know how LeBay is supposed to do that. So I believe that in the book, these are implied to be her own abilities. And also some of her actions, you know, where she goes to chase down the bullies, I could imagine that that's her. But we don't really know because, again, LeBay appears sometimes when she is doing her killings and sometimes he's not around. So we don't really know. At the same time, we learn that LeBay is a hateful man and that he was already a hateful man before he had Christine. But he became increasingly so the longer he had Christine, and then he stopped caring about his family, and that is all very similar to the development that Arnie makes. There is definitely a change in the owner because of Christine, but with LeBay, there is already some of that present before that. Personally, based on how I read the book, I would say that it is implied that LeBay's physical possession and obsession with Christine during his life have turned into a ghostly possession of her after his death. As I mentioned, Dennis sees him driving Christine when she attacks him. His spirit kind of haunts and possesses the car. Maybe he is the one driving her when she goes on her murder adventures. We don't really know. It seems that LeBay's spirit is responsible for causing Arnie's fatal car crash when Christine is not present. So at least some of the action is done by LeBay's ghost, and he is to some degree controlling Christine. Before his death, all she does is do the time-bending, self-repairing stuff, but once he dies, that's when the violence begins. This would mean that Christine is certainly a supernatural object with some special powers, but she is also a possessed object, a haunted object, who is primarily or to some degree brought to life by the ghost of an evil human who still owns her. And this is what I find disappointing. Madden writes in his article that Christine's destructive violence, that is mostly directed against men, can be read as the female agency and female sexuality that are suppressed in the nostalgic patriarchal world of the novel. Through Christine's actions, this agency returns to disrupt order, right? She does a lot of things that are atypical for women, that are seen as particularly weird and monstrous in women. Like, she's aggressive, she's violent, she's filled with rage and anger, which is something that traditionally is more associated with male characters. So the part of femininity that this patriarchal, nostalgic world suppresses, she bursts right out into the open. And that's what makes her scary to characters like Dennis, who are very patriarchal male figures. And this is exactly what I like about Christine. She's unhinged and uncontrolled. Now, if we look at the book's explanation that Christine is at least to some degree controlled by LeBay's ghost, she loses a lot of her agency after all. She's not as much of a sentient being, a self-acting agent, as the book implies for the most part. Even in her autonomous actions, she is possessed and once again owned by a male owner. And that's just a bit lame. Like, first of all, the possession premise is very basic and something that happens so much in Western horror. Like, you got your haunted dolls and your cursed objects. The source of all the evil is either evil human spirits or demons. It's just a bit boring when there would have been the chance to explore the idea of sentient objects that is very rare in Western thought, but that, for example, is a whole own class of supernatural creatures in Japanese folktales. You know, that could have been really original and innovative. And in addition to being the more boring option, this possession explanation really takes away from Christine's incredible force and power. It reduces her to the toy of some horrible man. It reduces her disruptive power that Madden describes so well. It's just a shame that Christine, who was the only female character in the story with some real agency, the only one that is met with a bit of respect, that isn't constantly having misogynistic insults hurled at her, only for us to learn that all of this wasn't her agency after all. It's the man owns woman / car thing again. It's disappointing. It's just utterly disappointing and kind of boring. Christine has so much potential to be fascinating, to be a powerful female villain, until we learn that it isn't really her doing most of this. You have this concept, this idea of this evil car who's just angry and furious and aggressive out of her own energy because she's some kind of anomaly in space and time, and it just makes her really interesting and mysterious. And then she's just possessed by an evil dude's ghost. Now, luckily, John Carpenter's film version is a different story. As opposed to the novel, the film begins not with Dennis, who is much more central in the book than in the film. Another reason why I prefer the film, because Dennis is a fucking idiot. But it begins with Christine's origins. We meet Christine in the factory where she was built. She is fresh and young, gleaming red between her unremarkable white counterparts that are lined up for their final inspection before sale. And final, the inspection is for the inspector. He opens Christine's door, sits down on the red leather bench of the front seat, and taps his cigar. The ashes fall onto Christine's pristine interior. Instantly, the door lock snaps shut. The radio glows green, and music begins to play. The man begins to choke. When on the next morning another employee opens Christine's driver's side door, the inspector falls out of the car, lifeless. This opening scene demonstrates that it is Christine's own nature, her own sense of not tolerating any insult or injury that motivates her, long before LeBay is even a cloud of dust on the horizon. It's Christine that changes him, Christine that possesses LeBay, not the other way around. In fact, LeBay's ghost never appears in the film at all. He is only relevant as Christine's first owner, who is just as subjected to her influence as Arnie. They are both her puppets. And here the naming fits into it that I mentioned at the very beginning, right? How Arnold is an anagram of Roland, so basically these owners are just repeating. They are repetitions of one another. And I think this makes more sense in this reading of the story, right? That Christine just replaces her owner. They're just an endless series of puppets that she has. Christine gives these guys the things that they want, the freedom and power associated with a beautiful car, A more acceptable masculinity to Arnie, who gains better looks, leather jackets, quiff, and a pretty girlfriend, but in return they become hopelessly dependent on her, they become addicted to her. Their whole world revolves around Christine, so what she gains is power, control, admiration, and love. As I said, she possesses them. They do what Christine wants them to do, and Christine does what she wants to do. This breaks up the idea of car and woman as male property. They may think she is their property, but truly, Christine calls the shots. This means that in the film, Christine, and Christine alone, is the main driving force of the action. More specifically, it is her motive of revenge. Because Christine kills people, and only people, who have harmed her in some way. The man who drops cigarette ash on her, the bullies who trash her, who, if she were a person, which in her mind she is, are basically gruesome murderers. And she tries to kill Lee and Dennis, who insult her, who don't trust her, who try to get between Christine, her puppet Arnie, and her revenge plans. Because of this revenge motive that sparks the unhinged, furious killing spree in Christine, we can actually sort John Carpenter's film version broadly into the sphere of female revenge narratives. And female revenge narratives are very, very interesting. And this is where the psychoanalytic theory comes in again. So, there will be some castration and stuff like that. Enjoy. In her fantastic book, The Monstrous Feminine, which I've mentioned before in other episodes, Barbara Creed writes about female revenge films. And she says that the typical female revenge film is a movie where a female main character is violated and goes on a rampage of murderous revenge to right the wrong that was done to her. And best known within these narratives is probably the rape revenge film. It's always a similar kind of premise. The female main character is raped at the beginning, and this is the original wrong that sparks the protagonist's revenge arc, and she spends the rest of the film hunting down and killing, or in some films castrating, literally, the perpetrators or potential perpetrators, people that she feels threatened by, for example. These female avengers are usually sympathetic figures. We see their actions as understandable, and we tend to root for them to win. There are other examples of female revenge narratives that are not rape revenge stories. For example, Tarantino's Kill Bill movies, where the bride takes revenge for a murder attempt. Or then we get Tarantino's Death Proof, where a group of young women take revenge on a guy who tries to kill them. Or Shoshana's plotline in Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds, who avenges the murder of her family by the Nazis. You may notice that Tarantino loves the revenge plot so much that I once took a seminar about Tarantino and revenge, which is where a lot of this theory actually comes from. So what we can see here is that in these female revenge narratives, the initial wrong is usually committed by men, who very, very seriously violate the main character. Kill Bill is a bit of a different case to many of these revenge stories because, the bride is basically constructed along the lines of a male hero, so it works a little bit differently to very female revenge narratives, but it is the basic structure. The basic structure is similar, and we can see this basic structure reflected in Christine's behavior in the film as well. In the book, she's a bit less focused. She also kills people for other reasons than obvious revenge, and we know that she's not really the one in control there anyway. But in the film, we can actually read Christine as an avenging heroine who hunts down the men who physically violated her, the bullies who trashed her, and I think it's understandable that she's mad at them. She wants to take her revenge for their basically trying to kill her. And maybe this is why I actually find her cool and I want her to win. She fights against people who treat her like an object when really she is a sentient being. And if that is not an interesting comment when we consider the earlier cars and women being equated trope, then I don't know what is. Barbara Creed, who wrote the Monstrous Feminine book, she links the heroine of the female revenge film to a type of monstrous feminine that we have encountered before in our lovely French Revolution decapitation episode, where we spoke a lot about the guillotine and the figure of the femme castratrice, the woman as castrator. Because our girl Christine, she castrates the shit out of all these people. As a refresher, castration in this context, in psychoanalytic literary analysis, castration isn't always literal. It can refer to any forceful taking away of male power and autonomy. Back in the guillotine episode, we talked about how beheading someone, killing someone, is also a symbolic act of castration from a psychoanalytic perspective, because the person's agency and power and their subjecthood, in the case of the guillotine represented by their head, is violently taken from them. With Christine, it's a bit more subtle. There's no removing of limbs that would be very castration coded. But she scares the shit out of these men before brutally murdering them, and through this she also takes away their subjecthood, their power, their agency, and reduces them to just an object, a lifeless body. And on an emotional level, she does something similar with Arnie. She absorbs his identity, his individual subjecthood, as she controls everything he does. He becomes fully dependent on her, and he turns into a duplicate of another person rather than being himself. It's a sort of emotional castration. This one is a bit more tricky because Arnie really hasn't done anything to her. So here I don't really see the revenge motive other than maybe, the fact that he tries to own her as an object. But yeah, I think in Arnie's case, it really is something more malicious and exploitative in Christine's motivation than just pure revenge. It's here that we kind of lose the sympathy a little bit that we'd have for the protagonist of a female revenge film, because Arnie hasn't committed a wrong that needs to be put right. Unless, of course, we read him buying her as male attempts to control and own women. Then I could sort of see it. That works as a reading. It is a little bit more malicious than in the other cases, right? There is a difference between him, who really tries everything to make her happy, and people who literally demolish her. It is here that Christine slides a little bit into the direction of another monstrous feminine figure, one that really terrifies. Creed calls her the psychotic woman, who is irrational, and her motive isn't one as understandable as revenge for a direct violation that was done to her. This psychotic woman acts out of jealousy, rage, and hysteria. She's not usually presented as sympathetic. A lot of the time, she is one who is angry because she's denied things that other women have. So she takes revenge for being beaten by other women, in a sense. She cannot reach the ideals, the patriarchal expectations of womanhood, and because of that, she becomes angry and violent, because she's denied a partner or a family or something like that. This aspect of Christine is the one that is hinted at by the other woman-type film posters that contrast her with Lee. Lee is the official girlfriend who does get an official partner and who we're supposed to root for. And the psychotic woman is a character that is perhaps to be pitied, but usually she's not sympathetic. And I think this is maybe the way in which, if we are supposed to be scared of Christine, we're supposed to read her that way. And this kind of psychotic woman, a lot of the time, is killed at the end. She is punished for her transgressions of the patriarchal order at the end of the film. Just as Christine is killed by Dennis at the end, who really is the most patriarchally masculine person in the film, so he carries out the patriarchal punishment. The athletic, good-looking guy who the girls all fancy, blah, blah. Him killing her at the end really sort of puts her in that place of the psychotic woman who has to be punished for her actions, rather than to be the avenging female character. So yeah, I think that Christine, from my perspective, the way I read the story, is this avenging femme castratrice. I mostly see her as this Avenger figure, which is probably why I like her so much and I want her to win. But we'll concede that she also has a more malevolent side to her that is overly aggressive and destructive. So I suppose Christine is a bit of both. She's Avenger and I don't really like the fact that she's called a psychotic woman, because they're not really psychotic in the sense of having psychosis, but it's what term they use in like the psychoanalytic theory. It just means that she's a little bit, she kind of loses it. Christine is a bit of both, She's Avenger, but she also a bit crazy. She is complex. She contains multitudes. Yet another reason why she is far superior to any of those pesky humans in the story. But there's one last detail that links Christine to the notion of castration that I just have to mention before we go. It's a fun one, also discussed by Creed. End of the film, showdown. Here Christine is already quite a bit damaged because she's fighting Petunia. Her hood is kind of broken in a way that makes like these pointy triangles, so it looks like she has a sort of snarling predatory mouth. And this is fantastic because it doesn't only give her human features and therefore yet another mark of a sentient being with agency, which we love about film Christine, but it reminds me of one of the craziest and unhingedest concepts of monstrous femininity ever, that actually have roots in mythologies from across the world. And that is the vagina dentata. The vagina dentata is the image of the toothed vagina that, being a vagina, seen from a heteronormative male perspective, seems inviting and promising pleasure if you look at it at first, but if penetrated, it will just bite off the penetrating member. She is a dangerous, beautiful, deadly trap. If this is not our girl Christine sitting by the road and enticing Arnie with her wonderful vintage beauty to buy her and fall in love with her, only to be his death in the end. Now, the vagina dentata is usually read as a representation of misogynistic male fears of female sexuality and female agency. This thing of being beautiful and inviting and sensual and then suddenly attacking and castrating, right? Because that would be very castrating. The vagina dentata is very clearly linked to the castration thing. I can certainly see Mr. Stephen playing into this interpretation. I can see the intention being to make Christine both more female and more scary, but I prefer to read it a bit differently. Because the vagina dentata has empowering potential, just as the character of Christine does, the potential of resistance. She is a perfect concept to reclaim as a sign that women aren't just helpless victims. You cross boundaries, it will have consequences. There will be painful repercussions. We may say that the vagina dentata is the pussy that grabs back. And perhaps Christine has entirely manipulated me into twisting everything she does, no matter how violent or sneaky, into something I can 100% get behind. Maybe I'm entirely deluded when it comes to Christine, and I will take no criticism. She is a legend, an icon, a queen, and if I want to see her as an avenging heroine who punishes horrible people, I will. Of course, backed up by the text and some actual literary analysis that hopefully make a convincing argument. I'm not a beginner, case closed. No, but really, Christine is such an interesting figure, not only in how captivating and complex the character she is, but also in how she reflects and engages with so many key themes of especially American pop culture. The relationship between man and car, especially when we consider that she comes from the 50s, when cars really became mainstream commodities that even teenagers owned and formed close attachments to, because they were their first pieces of freedom. And that's exactly what Christine is for Arnie, his first touch of freedom. Very ill-fated and short-lived freedom, but freedom. At the same time, Christine disrupts the hierarchies of a stereotypical American high school by raising the most awkward nerd into a position of power and admiration by getting him a hot girlfriend, the greatest prize you could get. So she kind of plays with these these patriarchal power dynamics. At the same time, she unites two of the most important female horror figures, the avenging heroine and the psychotic killer. And both of those threaten established ideas of masculinity, more or less successfully, right? But as a result of this duality, the trope of having your villain survive after all in the end to announce their return just as everybody thinks they're safe, in Christine's case, it is not just a threat that the horror will return, but also a little spark of joy at the realization that she remains unbeaten. And most impressively, Christine fascinates in her ability to be far more charismatic, expressive, and powerful than any human character in the story. Stephen King may present Dennis to us as a hero at the end who saves the damsel and beats the horrific madwoman, but he's just some run-of-the-mill slasher teen. They were generous, you could say, perhaps in combination with Lee, he becomes a bit of a final girl character, but that's not really convincing because the interesting thing about the final girl is that she has traditionally feminine and masculine properties, and here these are clearly split between Lee and Dennis. Meh. But Christine. Oh, Christine, we'd all fallen in love with her if we spotted her parked by the side of the road. We would admire her powers of regeneration, and we would cheer her on when she races down the street in flames, hunting down those who try to destroy her in righteous fury, forever revving her Revengine. And finally, we get to a little production fun fact section, because while I was watching the film, I became really curious about how they actually did the practicalities of filming those action scenes, because Christine gets absolutely wrecked several times throughout the film. She sets herself on fire by driving through a burning gas station, she smashes into walls, and then she just regenerates herself. And this was all done with practical effects back in 1983. So I was really curious, did they just wreck a dozen cars? And how do you make a car put itself back together on screen? Well, this is how they did it, according to Wikipedia. The production team tracked down 24 1958 Plymouth cars in junkyards and from private owners, although they weren't all Fury models. The Fury models were relatively rare, so there weren't that many of them left, and not a lot of, Furies in good condition were available. So a lot of the cars that they used for the film are similar models, but not exactly the same one. Specifically, they used the cheaper version of the Fury, basically, which was the Belvedere model. It had the same car body, but it had a cheaper engine and it was kind of made from cheaper materials. What's also interesting is that cars like Christine, Red Plymouth Furies, as the book correctly says, weren't really made. The model was regularly produced in beige, so Christine would actually have been a custom paint job, which also means that they couldn't just find red Plymouth Furies. Only the cheaper sister model, the Belvedere, was produced in red, and there were also more of them around because they were cheaper and more affordable and more people bought them. So much of the Christine you will see in the film is actually the slightly different Belvedere model. Today, if you look up Plymouth Furies online, you will find a handful of red Plymouth Furies from 1958, but they are usually restored specifically to look like Christine because she is an icon. Of course, you want a car that looks like Christine, duh. The Belvedere model is also often sold as a Christine car. Again, it has the same body, it looks the same, almost. Yeah, I did go and look at classic car dealerships online. I read into a specific model of an over 60-year-old car. That is the power of Christine, because I'm not bothered about cars at all, and still went and read up about this stuff. I now know that the Belvedere tended to have early rusting issues, but the Fury didn't, because the body was made from higher quality metal. I know that the Belvedere had silver details, while the Fury had gold ones. Learned all of that because of Christine. I'm literally Arnie seeing her by the side of the road and becoming obsessed, aren't I? Back to the filming. So they bought these 24 Plymouth cars, and they used them to put together a number of identical complete Christines for the shoot, because some of them were pretty messed up already, so they could use only parts of them, and because they were different models, they didn't all look exactly the same, so they created several complete identical Christines from the bits and pieces. All of these Christines, except for 2, were completely trashed during shooting. So no, they didn't wreck a dozen cars, they wrecked almost 2 dozen cars. Buying and restoring these vintage cars cost $1.5 million in 1983, which today is $4.8 million. So they spent a shit ton on cars that they then wrecked. And the regenerations, the bits where we see Christine repair her own damage with magic or something, how did they do that? In 1983, all practical effects. So what they did was they put wires inside the car body and attach them to different parts of the body so they could pull on them and basically pull specific elements of the car into different shapes without any manipulation being visible from the outside. And then used the footage of these manipulations from the inside and played it backwards in the film. So it looks as if Christine pulls the deformed bits back into their original place. It's fascinating. Practical effects are so interesting and creative and probably really fun to come up with. I just love learning about how they did these practical effects back in the day without CGI and all of that. It's just so much cooler to be like, oh, they put wires inside the car and then pulled on them instead of, oh, they just did CGI. I like practical effects. They're cool. Sometimes they look silly, but I think they're cool. Oh yeah, speaking of practical effects, they also set a gas station on fire. Because why would you not set a gas station on fire if you have the chance? It is certainly very much in the spirit of Christine. And here at the junkyard, where Plymouth Furies go to be reborn, is where our journey ends. We have reached the end of our road, while of course Christine's will continue. I hope you enjoyed the ride tonight. If you did, you can leave a comment expressing your enjoyment on this episode. You can follow us on Spotify so you don't miss any episodes, and if you wish, you can give us a 5-star rating too. But before you get out of your seat and close the door behind you, make sure you don't leave anything behind, especially not cigar ash. You don't want to take the risk. And remember, the first rule of Midnight Automobile Club is to tell everyone about Midnight Automobile Club. We may not be able to help you with a flat tire or overheating, but if you need a bit of support to exact your furious revenge, we are always at your service. We hope that you will grace us with a visit again soon here on the Nocturnal Side. And until then, we sincerely wish you sweet dreams and good night.